Hello, and welcome to today's ATARC webinar. My name is Jonathan Albaum, and I'm the Federal CTO at ServiceNow, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. The President's Management Agenda was released late last year and has already made a big impact on the federal community. The PMA focuses on three priorities: the federal workforce, improving customer service, and the business of government. Today, we're going to be focusing on that first priority: strengthening and empowering the federal workforce. But before we get started, I want to say welcome to all of our attendees. And I want to offer special thanks to Kim Eastridge from ATARC and Connie Coleman and the entire team at ServiceNow for helping to organize today's session. During our session today, you're going to hear from some really great panelists. We're going to offer a few poll questions, and we will also have the opportunity for Q&A from our audience. If you have questions that you want to ask the panelists, please submit them in the Q&A section of this platform, and also be sure to answer the poll questions if you want to receive CPE credit. Now, as I mentioned, we have great panelists today. I want to go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves. So as I call your name, please turn on your camera and tell us a little bit about your background and what you're working on today. Let's begin with Robin Reese.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks so much for having me here today. And thank you so much to all of you for joining. My name is Robin Reese. I work at the Department of the Interior as a Senior Advisor for Human Capital Transformation under our Director for Human Capital and our Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer. I came to the department. My background is really more in information technology, not in human capital. And I think it's important to know a little bit about the context of where I come from in order to understand why I'm so interested in the workforce, and particularly in the work that I've been doing in readying the workforce. So up until about 3 years ago, when I came to the department, I was in the information technology field. I started as a vendor supporting program control, financial management, strategic staffing for federal IT contracts. So I remember when I first came to the area and you said, "Oh, what are you working in?" You're like, "I'm a defense contractor." Everybody knew what that meant. You were doing information technology contracts for the government. And I spent almost a decade doing that. And then I transitioned into the federal government doing capital planning and investment control at the National Science Foundation, where I then moved into managing central IT governance and then acting as a senior advisor to the chief information officer. And I wanted to give that context because I'm really a business person. You know, I don't really identify as an IT person. I don't identify as a human capital person. I really care about the business and making sure that we're meeting the missions for the American people. So when I came to DOI within human capital, I came with a specific focus of giving the workforce the tools they need in order to continue delivering on the mission. And Jonathan, just what that means to me is that I want to unlock human capital data. I want to combine it with business data, strategic workforce planning data, learning and development data, so that we can really be ever ready. That's how I call it. And I've done that just as a way of background at the department through an initiative we call My DOI Career, which we built from scratch over the past 3 years. It has a public-facing component on doi.gov/careers to raise awareness of careers, but it also has an internally facing component where we are prototyping intelligent technology-based tools that can be deployed for use by people that are trying really hard to deliver on missions, but that are overburdened, or who might be looking to more easily and organically evolve their careers. So in effect, what I'm really focusing on right now is how do we provide centralized capabilities that can be deployed to the field to assist our employees with carrying out the missions. And so workforce is the top priority to me when I'm talking about mission.
Thank you for getting us off to a great start, Robin. There's a lot there, and I want to get back to my DOI career later in the conversation. Next, I'd like Brigadier General Sean Campbell to introduce himself.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you for all those who are attending. I see that several of my teammates are actually on, probably here to give me some feedback afterward. And then one of my old mentors, Mr. Sitterly, is on. So Dano, I see you out there as well. So no questions from you, because he'll throw something hard at me. So I am currently doing the Director of Manpower Organization and Resources for the U.S. Air Force, and I just came to the job about 6 weeks ago. So my perspective for this panel really comes from my previous job, the one that I left after almost 2 years, which was as the Deputy Chief Human Capital Officer, helping build the United States Space Force. So this topic is right in the wheelhouse of everything that we've been doing in the Space Force to build, if you will, a startup military enterprise. First time we've done it in the United States in 73 years. So there's no playbook for us to use, which gave us an ability to think differently about the talent management lifecycle and the ways that we can deliberately and deeply develop our guardians and then how we empower them to do their jobs. And the reason that is very, very important to us, and I think just as a little bit of context setting for why we needed to develop the Space Force as a standalone military service, even though we've been in the space environment for decades and decades, comes from a speech that's almost 65 years to the day, today, 19 February 1957, the General Bernard Schriever, who we call the father of U.S. Air Force missiles and space programs. He delivered the speech about space. And one of the things he says in there is, in the long haul, the safety of our nation may depend on our achieving space superiority. Now, mind you, that was 65 years ago. We hadn't even launched anything into space at that point in time. And in that speech, he continues on and says, decades from now, the most important battles may not be sea battles or air battles, but space battles. 6 months after he gave that speech, the Russians, or then Soviets, launched Sputnik, and it touched off what we know as the space race. So here we are 65 years later, where we have near peer competitors on the global stage, and we have to have a deliberate focus on space. And as an environment, it is exceedingly difficult in which to operate. And so I'm hoping we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about how we're getting after doing that in this deliberate development of our guardians.
So I think that there's a lot there to come back to also, Sean, especially how do you hire and train for the skill set that, you know, is going to be critical to the future of our country and our security. So a lot more to discuss. I would like John Jensen to introduce himself next.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. I'm really looking forward to also hearing from the panelists as well as any questions from those attending. This is personal to me. This is who I am as a person. I have been really since the day I first swore allegiance to the United States and joined the Army in 1989. Yeah, I know I don't look that old, but that's how old I am. And spent 25 years in the Army, and I retired in 2014 as a first sergeant E8 who managed staff. That's what my role was all along, and spent my last several years in congressional affairs, and that led me to the VA, where I participated in that. And it's really about strategic communication, speaking with everyone and everyone's voices being heard and projected across the government and obviously to the Hill. And that led me to the role here as the VHA Chief of Staff, where we have about 371,000 employees spread across the United States, including other territories. And we even have a very small clinic in the Philippines. So understanding and knowing how our employees and what their needs are every day is what I feel like my role is. And we're into over the second year of a pandemic where our healthcare providers have been at the front lines of this for 2 years, and having served in combat 3 different times, I can't imagine doing 2 years of straight combat, which they have done. So ensuring that our employees have the tools and resources necessary to do the work that they need to do is a key component of what we do every single day, and our focus is on. And you can imagine that in the second plus year of a pandemic, it's not good enough just to pat people on the back and say, thanks for what you're doing. There has to be actually concrete examples to keep them on board. And if you're at all familiar with what's happening in healthcare today, nurses can receive $50,000 sign-on bonuses to go to another healthcare system. And so how do we ensure that we keep the talent that we have? Mission tends to hold our staff with us because the mission is so great, but that's not enough. And so we're looking for tons of new resources and opportunities to be able to focus on that. One thing we're working on today is called the reboot effort. It's reducing employee burnout and optimizing transition for our staff. And what that really gets to is to look at that. We listen to them. It's created a SharePoint website where they can offer comments, thoughts, suggestions. We try to respond to many of them. We have a group that's spread throughout the United States that's on that to answer it. As you can imagine, me trying to answer all that would be very difficult. And then we listen to them. We're actually just getting ready to send a message out that talks to supervisors, managers, and leaders about how you talk to your employees about maybe looking at a new way of scheduling the work that they do. Which in a healthcare environment is a little different, or could be a little bit different. So that's some of the major initiatives that we're working on. It's a blessing to be able to be with an organization with so many caring people that's doing a mission that is so important for our country. So thanks.
Thanks, John. I think there's a lot to get back to there as well, especially on retention and retention strategies. That is a topic on the minds of a lot of people. I want to conclude the introductions by asking Mike Serrano to introduce himself.
Great. Thank you, John and Kimberly. Thanks again for hosting and having all of the panelists come together and having me as a participant. Very excited about the discussion. A little bit of background here. My current role as the director of the Defense Manpower Data Center, we have a significant portfolio of direct services that we provide across all of DoD and beyond. We manage about 58 million identities that include all of those individuals affiliated with DoD. So there's those in direct support of DoD, contractors, government, military, about 8 million. And then the rest are mostly veterans or other nation partners, NATO country affiliations, dependents of military members. So it's a very broad group that we support for managing many, many services across the department, billions of transactions every year for things such as patient identity services with the electronic healthcare record and just transactions of all the benefits of life insurance, support for the payroll systems in terms of personnel actions, and capturing much of the data of a military service member's record, which we share extensively with the VA for support to our veterans and their families. So we have a pretty broad mission with what I've been doing here for the last 5 years. Prior to that, worked Air Force with some colleagues who are also on the line here, and spent a few years as working in the CIO lane and in the financial management community. And prior to that, 20 years with the SBA's disaster loan program, which was a great mission set for launching me off into the SCS career. Very, very excited about the discussion today. Really wanted to center in on the realities that we've all been experiencing and what we're doing about it over the, particularly through the pandemic period. What technologies, what retooling for individuals, what does the workforce look like and what's it going to look like? How do we include different sets of thought out there, right? The diversity and inclusion aspects, and in how do we automate, how do we get better at some of these problems such as time to hire, and again, there's a pretty large transition happening. We're very much, my organization itself, about 350 government, about 2,000 contract support, and a handful of military folks, but we certainly, in support of the entire department from an HRIT service delivery focus, have a great impact on what kind of services can get prioritized and delivered, and how do we ensure that those services are the right things to make our not only our customers on the endpoint that are the beneficiaries or affiliations, but the actual individuals who are also executing the DoD mission, the military members and the civilians that support that in the contractor. So we play a big role in that. We play a big role in the ICAM focus in terms of managing identities and credential issuance, but also how do we make those things much more efficient for what we see as the modernization opportunities of the future, the requirements of today and tomorrow. And I look forward to the further dialogue on how we are going about that and how everyone else is experiencing the realities of life today.
Well, thank you. I think, there's a couple of themes that are really, emerging from these introductions. I hear a lot about data. I've heard about some basic or challenging ongoing issues, retention, time to hire, ultimately coming back to, do we have the tools in place to have the right workforce to meet the missions, which vary, but have some overlapping requirements. I think that we heard, maybe between the VA and the DoD. So there's a lot here for us to continue to talk about. I want to push forward though, and begin by asking our audience to answer a poll question. So we can get that first poll question up there. The question here is, what is the biggest workforce challenge facing your agency? So please go ahead and answer the poll question. Remember, you need to answer these poll questions if you do want to receive CPE credit for this event. So we'll get the answers here in a moment. But as we await for those, Robin, I'd like to ask you to take this first question about the PMA itself and this fact that the very first priority of the PMA is around strengthening and empowering the federal workforce. Why do you think that was necessary? I know you've worked in this space, for a while, and you have the IT background. I'd love to get your perspective on this.
I think my simple answer to that, Jonathan, is quite simply that the work is not done. So we know that under the prior administration, we had President's Management Agenda priorities that focused on the workforce. And I came out of that administration being tied to that CAP goal team, the cross-agency priority goal team, with a very strong conviction that we had a lot of work left to do. And we needed this priority to transcend administrations, right? I also think that the longer answer to that is that as I reflect back on the time that I've spent in the information technology field, I think that my experience has been that we've come through a period where information technology helped us maybe handle the transactions of our work a little bit easier. And so people still did the work, but they needed to record it somewhere, maybe process it somewhere. And then we moved into the space where we were really focusing on how information technology could help our customers interact with us. So now, instead of it just being in support of my particular function at my desk, it's in support of a communication tool between the two parties. So then we moved through that, and we've spent so much time focusing on modernizing information technology and making that experience really wonderful for the customer, that we've forgotten that the customer inside the organization is the employee delivering the mission. And if we don't arm them with the tools to actually deliver the mission, and by tools, I don't just mean technology tools. I mean, how do we turn data about what we need or predict that we need in order to deliver on missions into a capability that allows our employees to be ready to meet those missions, right? How do we operate our business functions in a better way, leveraging data and leveraging technology to help the employees actually deliver the citizen services that are being demanded of them? So again, simply, the work is not done, and maybe it's just time to turn the focus.
Well, and I think that you referenced this, and I'm curious what the others on the panel think, but the data really seems to be a key, and understanding the work of the agency and the data that gets created, how it flows through the organization, and how people use it to get their jobs done is really important. And I heard that, Mike, when you referenced supporting the VA, and I heard that from, I've heard that in other places as well. I'm curious if you want to comment on that, or John, perhaps, because of the interchange that naturally exists.
John, I'd like to jump in, because there's something that we are on the verge of, and I hate to get it in front of my bosses with an announcement, so it's really not an announcement, it's not done, but we are working jointly with the VA under the Joint Executive Committee, which brings together the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness, who I report to, as well as the Deputy Secretary for the VA, under a Joint Executive Committee where we are, me and my co-partner over at the VA, the Chief Data Officer, Tremender Paul, are working a joint strategy between the two organizations. So clearly we have already a data sharing relationship, but we understand one of the most important things is that there's a journey that every service member and every veteran take. And so as we look at our, in service members today that are active and their families, their experience and the outcomes that they have, we want to maximize those. And as they transition over to the VA, we want to make that as seamless and as clean and smooth as possible. And there are so many opportunities to do that. This joint strategy, as it comes together, is coined at doing that. We're focused as well on the civilian experience. We're focused as well on our contractor experience too, because there's no onboarding or outboarding process or anything in between that can do wonders to ruin a relationship, right? If you don't do it right. So we're really want to get it right. And so using tools, collaboration tools, that are out there that we have today, and maximizing not just the technology, but how we handle those populations.
And Mike, the opportunity to build trust is there at every step that you're describing. You build trust in drops and losing in buckets. One bad experience, and a veteran transitioning isn't going to trust the process, perhaps. So, you have a big opportunity through those small actions to make a big difference, I think. John, just curious if you have any thoughts on that, on the receiving end of maybe some of that data.
Yeah, I know, definitely. And I appreciate Mike's perspective on that. As we modernize our electronic health record, which we've had for a long, long time, it's not been an easy process. It's been a bumpy process. But one of the things that we began early on is to listen to our physicians and our clinicians that are actually doing the work in the electronic health record. What works best for them is about job satisfaction. It also upends to what Mike just mentioned about the customer and how the customer responds to that. If a physician is asking 65 questions in your 30-minute or 15-minute appointment, you're not really getting to what the customer needs, what the employee or the veteran is actually asking or in there for. And so we've worked really hard on that. We have lots more work to do with that, but we really have to listen to our employees, the ones on the ground that are actually dealing with our veterans, to hear their issues and concerns with how we modernize our electronic health record process. And it's a system that is replacing a system that we developed ourselves. And so there's a lot of buy-in to that. So there's a lot of change management that goes into that, and will continue to go into that into the future. And just while we're talking about IT and IT modernization and how that has impacted us and will impact us into the future, the IT has modernized so quickly over the last 2 years, and the ability for us to have this conversation right now and the conversations throughout is significant, and we can't overlook the advances that we've made in the last 2 years. When we first jumped into the pandemic in March of 2020, we began having online telephone calls, if you can imagine, with 165 leaders spread throughout the country and, in fact, the world. Conversations about how things going, what are you seeing on the ground, what can we do to help, what can we assist with? And as we developed into Microsoft Teams, which you utilize today, those conversations are seamless. They happen every single day for an hour, updates that everyone gets buy-in to. Everybody hears what's going on throughout our system. And that kind of advancement in communications through IT is huge in how our employees are able to know what's going on and be able to respond quicker, faster, and better.
We've all been changed through the pandemic.
We have.
It's really an incredible switch. And one of the big changes you're describing, and I want to ask Sean to jump in here, is on hybrid teams and the hybrid workforce, and the Space Force being new as you were standing that up. How did this concept of hybrid workforce impact any of the decisions you were making or the planning you were doing in your prior role, and the data around that, and the kind of work you do, the security aspect of it? How does that factor in? I think there's a lot there as well.
There's a tremendous amount there. So first, if we just start with using the technology that was available to us, we went out and looked at all the different digital platforms right away: Zoom, MS Teams, Slack, all the different platforms that are available. And we recognized very quickly, particularly in our environment, we couldn't use most of it because it was not cleared by the federal government for us to use those platforms to what you just described, because of safety and security of the data and what was going across our networks. Even just having a vocal forum like this, we were very concerned. And so until Zoom for Government was available to us and MS Teams for Government was available to us, it did create some challenges. What was really interesting is, think about the National Defense Authorization Act that stood up the Space Force was signed in December of 2019. 4 months later, we shut the world down. But we were given direction essentially by Congress to build a new force and get to initial operating capability in 18 months. We had planned for a 5-year window. They gave us 18 months. And so as a result, we had to learn very quickly how to use the technology that was available to us in order to not just build the service. I was person number 5 in the Human Capital Office. We're around 50 or so over there now. So we're trying to build a new startup, and we're doing it in a distributed manner. So we had men and women from across the country who were building the service. But one of the unintended consequences, and a positive consequence, was it taught us that we didn't have to do things the way that the Department of Defense traditionally does things, meaning everybody has to be on the same patch of dirt together. What we learned is, and it was part of one of the responses in the poll question about the multi-generational workforce. This is the first time in human history that there are 5 generations in the workforce. And so we have to recognize people just think differently. Now, with respect to the kinetic end of what we do, you have to be potted together. There's no way to do our mission sets distributed, but building the service, we were able to do that in a distributed manner. So much so that we would have left, absent COVID, we would have left talent on the table. Meaning there were men and women who are experts at what they do that we needed inside our formation that we just simply wouldn't have hired because they would have said, no, I'm not moving to DC. I'm not going to move to Colorado Springs. I'm not going to move to Los Angeles. So that the locus of control for the Space Force, those centers, we would have lost out on some talent. But because we were working in a distributed manner, we hired a whole slew of people, some of our very best and brightest that were available to us out there in the country, some with military backgrounds, some with no military backgrounds. But we got to tap into that multi-generational talent by going into a hybrid work environment. And then the last thing I'll say on this is we're never going back. We're not. And now with respect to what we do again at the front end of our business, we'll have to do that together because that's how modern warfare works. But with respect to things like staff work, we're never going to have 100% of our teammates back inside the office, and that's okay. And we have to be comfortable, and I think we now are with this is how it is, and we want to meet people where they are, and it really gets after this idea of generating enthusiasm to stay inside my organization. And hopefully we'll get to that later in the discussion about that deliberate development, how we're doing that and why that's so important to the retention, which was the highest percentage of the response that we got.
Yeah, I was gonna reference that. Recruiting and retention, 44% of our respondents said that was the biggest challenge facing them. And I want to jump back to Robin and ask, from a recruiting and retention perspective and hybrid workforce perspective, what is the Department of the Interior doing, and how are you thinking about these things in the interrelationship between these topics, and then how does that play into my DOI career, which I know you've worked on so diligently?
Oh my goodness, I just love hearing Sean say we're never going back. I think that there's still a little bit of a tendency in human nature to, once you are able to go back to the office, to revert to old ways because you know them and they're just, force of habit. It happens. Some of the things that we're doing to try to intentionally sustain a new culture is to deploy tools that help our hiring managers and HR specialists jumpstart a conversation about whether that job really can be remote. So if you've been working remote for 2 years and then somebody retires, do you need to backfill that position with an on-site person just because we're back in the office now? Or can you advertise it as remote right up front? And I think that the knee-jerk response when we're moving quickly with too much work to do and we have an 80-day hiring time frame is to just post it and get them back in the office, because then they can run alongside us and train up and get acclimated to the team. And we will miss talent doing that. We will end up with the same diversity demographics that we've had for the past 10 years if we continue doing that. So specifically, one of the internal prototype tools that we're developing under the My DOI Career Initiative, we call it the Remote Job Predictor, where we can just simply process a position description or a job analysis and say, if I were to make a suggestion to you about whether this job could be remote, I think it's highly likely, moderately likely, or not at all likely, because really this is a law enforcement officer at a park, right? But the notion is not so much to make a decision about whether the position should be remote, but more to jumpstart that conversation so that we can evolve the culture of the organization to thinking about remote before we automatically default to on-site. That is going to be a huge factor with respect to recruiting and getting candidates to apply for positions that also meet our desires to really embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We can't embrace it if we're just looking at what's around us in the 3-mile radius from my office.
Well, Robin, I worked in the federal government for a number of years before, I joined ServiceNow, and the idea that I could recruit the best IT professional from across the country to fill a role versus the people who happen to be available in a city where where we operated, it is an incredible idea that you can get the very best person, and it doesn't matter where they live. Now, we need the policies to support that, and we need agency leadership to support that. The DOI sounds like, as a department, you guys have embraced this idea, and the policies and procedures around this are in place. So it's a great stride. And
yeah, and I would say also, policies are policies and procedures are procedures. There's not a whole lot we had to change in order to stimulate a conversation about whether that job should be remote. And if you look at the business data, right, it just is a common sense discussion to have.
Yep. Well, I want to jump over to John and ask him to share his perspective on this topic, specifically how it relates to culture. So we've talked, you and I, Robin, we talked previously about onboarding and getting people into the organization. How do they adjust to the culture if they're not in the office full time or meeting people? So John, I'm curious, the role, how you see that, and what role does communication play in that, and how does agency culture evolve?
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation we've had for almost 2 years across our system, and it's a unique piece in VHA where we have the preponderance of our staff who are clinical. Almost 320,000 of the 370,000 are clinical. So obviously that's a lot of in-person work, but we talked about technology earlier. Our advances in telehealth, where we're providing 1,500% more telehealth today than we did pre-pandemic. So we're able to do kind of that hybrid approach. And so communicating the availability of that, how it works, convincing people of it. And it's all about communication and conversations with our staff to do that. Our Deputy Secretary just yesterday announced that March 14th is our future of work date, which is really when the hybrid timeline starts. And so the communications that we've had for, again, almost 2 years has been, I can't tell you as a manager leader how the work needs to be accomplished. You have to tell us. And so it's a two-way conversation. And we talk about that almost every week, especially in 21, that we talked about it every week. Tell us what is best for you, and we'll make the policies, regulations work for you, because it's all about how the employees can do the work. We have about 20,000 employees signed here to central office in DC. Today and throughout the pandemic, we've had somewhere between, including myself, less than 10 to maybe 50 over the last 2 years that have been in person. And that's variable. And so the questions that we ask, and again, tell us what works best for you through purposeful communication of, do you want to do a 4-hour telework in the morning and 4 hours in the afternoon in person if you need to be in person? Do we need to go virtual, and your virtual time may bring you to DC to a collaboration meeting quarterly or monthly or never? It just really depends on the workforce. And it becomes a bit difficult when you have a lot of people, as I mentioned, ingrained in kind of an old way of thinking of things, but this is a new way. We have a new way of doing things. We have the technologies to help us do them. And the key is to really communicate and over communicate that with our leaders, managers, and staff themselves. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly to you, a lot of the people that I'm going to see back in the office here in the next 45 days are employees that just want to be back. Mm-hmm. They just want to be here, and that's okay. But the opportunities are there. And I just want to take one more step back to the IT discussion. The next step for me then is to create this hybrid approach of, I have an in-person meeting, but I also have a home meeting, and to combine those two things together. Because I don't know if you tried to do them, they're not the same.
It's not the same.
It's not.
I mean, just as an anecdote, I went in my office and I was in a meeting, and I had my laptop at the conference room table, as did the other folks, so we could all have the experience that we're used to right now, seeing each other face to face. So we don't necessarily have the technology routinely in place to make it work. So we will have to adjust. This is it's an ongoing process of learning, and going back into the office will create some new challenges. I recognize what you're saying there. It's great to put it in the hands of the employees to let them think about how they want to work, and they have a lot of control and power in that. But there is something also about the manager being able to create the workforce they need to. And I'm curious how you're going to strike that that balance as this evolves and we have some more people back in this hybrid kind of environment, people in the office and people at home. So
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I could just say, Jonathan, I think the one thing, if you were to ask, and I think I've read a lot of the research that's gone on over the last 2 years, it talks about employees asking for flexibility. And to be frank, what I have seen is inflexibility, actually. They want to be flexible for what the employee wants, but the inflexibility is going, well, you want me to come back in? I'm not flexible in that. So we have to overcome that by ensuring that we are flexible in that. And there's some places, and I think Robin mentioned it, my police officers at my hospitals, you're going to have to be there. But that doesn't mean you have to be there 8 hours a day. If you're doing a report, our clinicians do much of their reporting and their notes at home, and they always have.
Mhm.
They might do 8 hours at the hospital seeing patients, and they'll go home for 4 hours and do their notes. They've been doing that all along. But if we can give them the time to do that during the day, that's how we create those opportunities. And so it's about flexibility at all levels, and that's how we get to success in my mind.
So I want to pause here and bring up our second poll question, building on something you noted, John, the fact that we need technology solutions that support this kind of environment. So the second poll question is, what technology solutions best support your agency's HR strategy? We should see that up in a second. And we'll come back to the answer on that as soon as we have it. So if I can jump back to Mike Serrano. Mike, just thinking about the idea of hybrid and creating a workforce that can support the agency's mission that can work from anywhere. I think that plays into this idea of a mission resiliency, which became really critical during those early days of the pandemic. How does communication and non-work related communication sometimes play into strengthening the workforce and the way we drive resilience and mission resiliency?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. It's we experienced it on day one when we didn't have all the tools and all the endpoints in place, and the idea was, hey, pick up the phone, talk, and the reality was when we went to maximum telework, we had a small number of individuals right across the department, less than 10%, that were remote workers, and a slightly larger number that teleworked on a regular basis. Not everybody teleworked. When almost everyone, or at least greater than 50%, went to this maximum telework, it changed the dichotomy, right? The idea of teleworking was the person generally was working on something that they could do by themselves and didn't need to communicate and collaborate with a whole lot of folks. Not across the board, but a very large percentage of individuals would telework or be remote workers because it was very conducive for them to do catch up on their appraisals, catch up on documents that they had to write or read, or testing, things of that nature that you generally only needed to touch base once in a while. But that changed overnight. And as the tools came in place, and DoD was very quick to get some tools in place to help collaboration and bring people together. It was a little spotty, but we got there within a short few weeks to get everybody on board. We had to change the way in which we interacted and obviously executed what was normally a meeting in a building with a lot of folks. Well, now you had everybody plugging in and coming together. And the other thing, as far as getting folks connected, how do you make sure they participate and aren't just there on the call and you don't really see them or interact? So we had to find ways in which we could go around the horn, right, and get everybody involved. And the third thing that I really put in place aggressively was focus groups. I spend an hour, about 6 times a month, I spend an hour with different group segments of my organization, just having something I call a fireside chat. And bringing that group together is usually 15 to 20 people, no more. And it's either individuals who are first frontline supervisors or branch chiefs or div chiefs, directors, and we just have a conversation about what's going on. And then we also extend that to, hey, you have a LinkedIn profile, do you have another type of collaboration forum? What other things are you doing outside the office that maybe we can plug into that are virtual, because we've been very much, in the virtual world. How do we get more people plugged in so that we can participate by asking people, what are you doing, and are you willing to share? And it's really gone a long way to bring people together and help combat what is very difficult scenario, is the burnout, right? And I think a lot of our folks have faced across the department, and certainly in my organization, you wake up in the morning, if you're working at home, you start working a lot earlier than you normally would have, because you're not driving to the office.
Right.
Yep. And then you're working till all hours of the night, and you're really constantly working, right?
Do you work from home, or do you live at work? I got asked that question, right?
Good point.
There is something there about having some real separation, and even that drive to work or metro to work is a break that we used to have, and some of us might have looked forward to. So there's a psychology, I think, behind some of this that we're going to have to continue to adjust to, and we'll see. I think it makes going into an office from time to time maybe more attractive than we might consider right now. But I just want to note that last poll question about the technology, because the technology continues to come up. The answer that was I think 70+ people thought that having an employee portal with access to all HR systems and data was the most important thing to support an organization's HR strategy. I want to build on that for just a second, and get a perspective from each of our panelists here, starting with Robin, around the number of systems that support employees, and your perspective. Is it easy to interact with this data, and can we make it less complex? And I'm starting with you because of the work you're doing on My DOI Career. And where did you start, and how did you push forward to get something that was maybe less complex and more customer friendly?
Data. So the number of systems are many. The level of complexity is high. I think that when I consider what I do at home, when I go to look something up and I just do a search on the internet and it brings everything to the middle for me, and then I can choose what's relevant. Or if I'm doing online banking and I have a number of different things with the banking institution that I can go to, I have an expectation of how easy it is to interact and get to where I need to get to. And then I go to the office, and I even if I have single sign-on, I'm going through multiple systems and the dots aren't connected for me. So the underlying premise of My DOI Career, or call it anything, it doesn't matter. The underlying premise of enabling an ever-ready workforce is, how do I give them back their time in the day and make it easy for them to interact with the organization? And by interacting with the organization, I'm leaving behind any single system. I really don't care about it. I care about the data in those systems. I want to bring it to the middle. I want to be able to connect those data sets against each other through whatever means. Data ontologies might not resonate with everybody, but a way to connect the data sets so that then I can deploy a capability, ask a question, and answer it for the user. So they don't really care what's happening behind the pretty interface, right? They just want it to be easier. So if we start with data first, and then be smart about cloud and advanced technologies, I think we can deliver those things without fully modernizing the backend systems. That's really the approach.
So Sean, just building on that, do you think it's possible to provide government employees a technology experience at work that's the same kind of experience they have at home? It's an age-old question, I think, here.
Not only do I think we can, I think it's a necessity. I don't. So if we think about data, we think about it across a full spectrum. It's not just human resource data. It's all the other data that we have. So in military perspective, I'm looking at readiness rates. That's data. What's my uptime for my aircraft or for my different weapons platforms? That I need all of that data. I need the health data to know whether or not the human weapon system is ready to deploy. So I need access to all that data. So just to give you a little bit of a perspective, in the Department of the Air Force, the challenge, we have 118 different systems on which just HR data resides. Then when you bring in health data and readiness data and all of those other elements, you're into the hundreds of systems. So the Department of the Air Force, comprised of the Air Force and the Space Force, has been on a multi-year journey to nick that down. So I think we're down to 116 HR systems that we're trying to drive basically down to 5.
Mhm.
And so
Are you going to get to that 5 by eliminating systems or combining them, or are you going to merge the?
It's an approach, right? So some of it is just sunsetting systems where the provider isn't even going to support it anymore. So we have no choice but to move that data somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then you layer in the complexity of all the flat file data that we have. And we've got to be able to move that out and make it readable and use customer process language so we can get after some of that data. COVID again helped us because we recognized on the readiness side, we didn't have a really good way to pull all of that together. We went into these disparate systems, pulled out data, and then put it onto a PowerPoint presentation or into a spreadsheet. And that's how we used it. So that is terribly unsatisfying to someone like me who wants to be able to do what Robin just described. I just want to go in and do quote unquote a Google search and find the information that I need. But it's two sides of the same coin. It's I as an individual, I want to be able to access my records and access my work platforms through a single portal where everything's there. And the Air Force is moving that direction. So I wouldn't suggest we're just ignoring it. We're not. It's bloody complicated, and we're talking about billions of dollars worth of effort to get after that. But we now have some clean data lakes where those different pieces of data are residing. So now we're able to do things with it to make data-driven decisions that are risk-informed, to give commanders the kind of tools and information they need to make better decisions. And so I would offer the other side of that coin is enlarging the access of our employees, our airmen and our guardians to that data. I don't want to make Mike's head explode, but my idea is I want every airman and guardian to have a higher level of access to HR related data, particularly those that are making decisions about hiring people, about looking at the talent management landscape. How do I know where people's gaps are so that I can get them developed and connect them digitally to developmental opportunities? And so I want to open up the aperture. There's ways, obviously, we can limit what you can access and what you can manipulate so we don't break systems. But I want to give more of that access to people so they can make those decisions. And frankly, I want to be out of a job. They don't need me because they can gain access to that data and make decisions on their own. And really, I think about it this way. Organizational effectiveness operates at the speed of trust. I often say this, and some of my teammates have heard me say this. I trust right now, as we're here on this call, there is a 25-year-old who's flying a $250 million aircraft, or a 20-year-old who's responsible on console for flying a multi-billion-dollar satellite. I trust that human implicitly, but I won't give you access to HR data.
I got to jump in and just thank you, Sean, for that, because we really have come through this space where we are now capable of decentralizing the information so that more people are affected at the point of need. And we have to empower them or we won't sustain mission delivery.
Robin, that's a really good point. And I want to jump to John in a similar vein. And, this idea of I should have the same technology at work that I use at home. If I look at a commercial hospital and the clinicians inside it and the technologies they use, how does that compare, or how does that compare to what VHA offers at your facilities? And if there's not parity, how do you achieve it?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think you hit on something that's key for us, and we're still trying to really understand how we can stay up with the technology as it continues to advance. And items in healthcare cost a lot of money, and they continue to go up in cost every single year. And the IT interfaces that happen in a hospital are surprising to most everyone. The things that you can get from a radiology machine to an MRI machines, you name it, all those things can link back to the patient's record and then link back to how the physician or clinician actually reviews those records. And so that also limits us a bit about what the information is and how we get that information to be at your home as the clinician to be able to review those things and ensuring that we have the security necessary for how those things are being shifted. We talked about data a lot, and I know Mike brought up Shaminder Paul, who's our chief data officer, our very first one in VA. That's something we have to look at, is how this data comes in. We actually have entered an agreement with the Department of Energy, who has these huge computer models to track a lot of the data that comes in on our veterans, who we at one point will be able to monitor their health care from when they're 18 years old, when they join the military, until they pass. And then we also have cemeteries where they reside upon their passing. And so ensuring where that data is at and how it comes there, as well as finding in there some things that we may be able to find some commonalities on, for instance, desert storm and that kind of thing. What happens after, post COVID? Who tracks what happens to you after that, and what that's going to look like into the future? So understanding all that data is first step, I think, and understanding what we have available to us, and then how we can transmit that to, when does it get to how you can coordinate with that through your phone or at home, and all these other modalities.
Right. Expectations have changed, and that is, you can't go back. We're not going back. You've all said it in one form or another. Recognizing where we are today is setting up a big challenge for all of us who work in this space, to give the people that work for us, who work in our organizations, the tools they can acquire commercially at a very low price and use to run their lives. So I want to jump over to Mike from a further DoD perspective on this idea of creating technology experiences and employee experiences that people crave, and how that ties to retention. Do you think you have a risk of potentially losing people if you can't give them those kinds of capabilities?
Absolutely true. Absolutely. And I experienced it when I worked with the Air Force, that we would hire brand new or bring in new recruits, and they'd come in and say, well, I'm going to be working on this new financial system. We send them down and they'd be working on an old COBOL system, right? So the experience wasn't good. We want to, you spend all your day on your Apple phone as an individual, and then you go work on a COBOL system or a basic. So I just want to share this experience that I wear multiple hats within my organization. I'm also the CIO and the portfolio representative for the department's HRIT portfolio, and we collaborate with all of the services and across all of the fourth and state agencies. And we've delivered this last year what is called a functional strategy that aligns under the Defense Business Council type of process. So we have in our functional strategy now a set of goals that are focused on modernizing that experience, not only for the customers, the endpoint, the entire communities that we support, but our own employee. Well, our employees are our customers, our service members are our customers. And that strategy is focused on modernizing, getting to the cloud, leveraging multi-cloud approach, and also having these outcomes that we talked about. What are those real outcomes you're looking for? Can you go to, and so we have several initiatives. One of them is to move our personnel system, particularly our civilian personnel system, to a cloud-based environment. It'll operate off of multi-cloud functions. It'll leverage some things like ServiceNow and other types of capabilities within integrating different complementary services. But we are looking for that single look and feel, just like as an individual, we all experience when you get your phone or your computer, and it's you're kind of going to that banking experience or that other forum that you're at. And we're on our way. We're on a journey to do that. And the key is the data plan, right? How do we integrate in data? It doesn't all have to be in the same place, but how do you bring it together when you need it? What are those real-time transactions, and how do you make that accessible, just like we all are used to in our daily life?
And I would offer that just the step of trying to understand what all the data is and how the data flows through the organization is a really valuable exercise for any organization, because it helps to understand these processes that have grown out organically over years, and they're not necessarily the processes that support the digital organizations that we're talking about. So we have about 5 minutes left. I want to ask for our last poll question to be placed up there, which is about why do employees leave, and be very curious what people think here. But as we head into the conclusion, I'm really interested in any final thoughts you all have about how we work together between industry and government to do the things that are necessary to strengthen and empower the federal workforce. The president, was very thoughtful in putting this as the number one priority in his management agenda. So it's something we're going to be focusing on for at least the next 3 years, and probably longer. Robin shared that in the beginning. This is lot of carry through. So, Robin, starting with you, what are your thoughts for the next 3 years, for the future, on how we work together to really strengthen the workforce?
Gosh, that's a big question, Jonathan. You know, it's hard for me to imagine in any way doing this without partnering, because we know so much of what we deliver in the federal government is delivering with our partners in the private sector. When I think about the things that we're doing related to delivering for our employees, delivering for our customers, and putting DEIA at the center of that, I think we need to be bold. We need to be really agile, like truly R&D, learn something, throw it away if it doesn't work, and try something else. And I think that we also need to be always thinking about the cultures of the organization and how we're being truly inclusive. So what that means for me is that, if I at the department have a certain set of principles, and then the partners that I bring in on the private sector side to help me deliver those things don't model the same principles, then I have an incongruency, and the product isn't going to be what I want it to be at the end. With respect to really being forward leaning on prototyping and learning, I think we need to get better at working together between the government and the private sector with respect to really doing things in small increments that aren't super well defined way out. That has a lot to do with our contract structures. And also just the sales delivery model, right? If you're going to sell me something that I have to sign up for a few years, forget it. But if I can buy it in pieces and learn about it on the way, then that's going to fit my model of moving into the space where we don't.
I think that's great advice. Thank you. I'm going to take that back to our team. I think that's a really good perspective. Sean.
Yeah, so I opened with a quote, so maybe I'll close with a quote. So this one comes from Liddell Hart, who was a very early air power enthusiast back in the early part of the 1900s. And he said the only thing harder than getting a new idea into the mind of a military member is to get an old one out. And so we have to think differently about the way that we engage our private partners. You hear a lot the last few weeks on the Hill about, goodness gracious, maybe we've overclassified all kinds of things. And that actually creates barriers to being able to work with our industry partners. But to bring it back to this discussion about empowering the workforce, as we set upon our deliberate journey to develop the human capital strategy, what we call the Guardian Ideal. So if you Google that for those who are interested, it will come up, and you'll get a view as into my brain. That was what my primary task was to develop that and deliver it for the U.S. Space Force. And we did not do it alone. We deliberately went out to the Aerospace Industries Association, working with our former undersecretary, acting undersecretary, Eric Fanning, and he connected us to partners in industry, and they pressure tested the things that we were trying to develop inside that ideal. And I'll say the reason we call it the ideal, not the adjective, but the noun, is because we're trying to develop and deliver the very best version of each of our humans, our guardians, what I like to refer to as our 5th generation human weapon system. We didn't do it alone. We went deliberately to industry and talked with experts and engaged them, and they helped us develop a strategy to get after some of this idea about making you the best version of you. And what we know is if you do that, people will stay.
And that syncs with the answer to our last poll question. The biggest challenges, the two that we're leading, were lack of a career path and lack of training and development opportunities. So I think you're right on with what the audience thinks here. So, John, final thoughts on how we move forward.
Yeah, I think Robin maybe touched on it with agility. I think the ability to be agile is key. I think in this environment, as we have advancements in IT and in our case, advancements in healthcare and in medicine, we need to look for new and better opportunities. We have to partner with our industry partners in order to get to that. We do a lot of advancements inside of VA. We really do. We have the largest healthcare research arm in the world, in fact. And so we're able to create advancements, but it doesn't do us a lot of good if we can have the manufacturer actually do it. We can do it in a small part. We did this actually with PPE early on in the pandemic. We rallied all of our 3D printers together to start creating it, but we could produce maybe 1,000 a day. That's not going to do us a lot of good. We have 370,000 employees and 9 million veterans that we see. So we have to partner with industry to do so. So looking for new and better ways to look for agility and to embrace that agility, I think is key. And that's what we utilize our industry partners with every single day and work in conjunction with that.
Well, thank you for that. And Mike, why don't you bring us home? We've heard agility, we've heard data, we've heard partnering. What else can you suggest to help advance the workforce, empower the workforce over the next few years?
Well, yeah, my colleagues really nailed a lot of great points. So I won't go over all of them, but the thread that I pull through all of that is, the government got to where it is, not because of a lot of bad behavior and dumb things. It just grew to be the most complex business in the world, associated with every potential industry you could think about. And as it grew over time, it had a lot of complex processes and systems and things. So untangling that is difficult. It's hard. It's a complex problem. And I think everybody talked about the agility. That's not the mindset of the person who's executing a one-year budget, right? The mindset is I need to execute these dollars on what's important today, and maybe next year it's a different thing. We really have to start looking at those building blocks and how to create synergy. And if there's one thing I could say about partnerships with the government and industry, it's to try to bring in that change management piece of it too, because we need to have vision for it to get to this place that we might need to be in 5 years or 3 years from now. Is going to take building blocks, but steps and integrated steps along the way, but decision points. And so we might think we want to be somewhere in 5 years, but in 1 year from now or 2 years, that might shift to something else logically and realistically. So bring that to the table, and I think we start moving in the right direction, which might not be the direction we think it is at this moment.
Right. And I think that goes back to what Robin said, small digestible chunks. Don't bite off too much. Don't bite off a 5-year project, bite off a 5-month project. And I think that's a great way for us to conclude this, the panel. We've had, I think it's really tremendous conversation and a lot of great ideas and some really actionable ideas for our audience and for members of industry and government alike. Think about the data, take bite-sized chunks and focus on those and get those right and learn, move forward, be able to integrate systems and data, give a user experience that mirrors what people see outside of their work lives. All great concepts that we can apply. As we conclude, I want to let the audience know that there's one final poll question about CPE credits. Please place that up there and answer accordingly if you want to get your CPE credits. And I just want to say one last thank you to all of our panelists. You were really great, and I really appreciated the depth of our conversation today. You made my job very easy. And I want to thank everyone at ATARC and all of my colleagues at ServiceNow that helped to make this session possible. Thanks for everybody who joined. I hope that you'll be back on February 17th for the next ATARC webinar, which is on strengthening the future of DevOps through emerging technology. But also note that my colleagues at ServiceNow will be back for some other webinars on the President's Management Agenda, one on customer service and one on the business of government. So lots of great conversations to come. This is a tremendous time, I think, to be part of the federal community. So thanks for joining. I hope to see you at our future webinars and have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.